Hanukkah Sameach. Happy Hanukkah. Well, you can see this is our fourth night of Hanukkah, and I am holding my little book called Celebrate God's Love, Hanukkah, Christmas, Fact and Fiction. For those of you who don't want to get the larger Celebrate Jesus holiday book, you just are interested in the Christmas Hanukkah story, here it is in a very simple, easy to read story. It's a great gift, whether you're giving it for Hanukkah or you're giving it for Christmas. Well, that's the end of the commercial. So come with me as we talk some more about what is Hanukkah. I want you to remember that God chose Israel according to the prophet Isaiah. It was recorded in chapter 43 and verse 10. God chose Israel to be his witnesses. For those of you, for those people over the thousands and thousands of years of recorded history, for those who asked, tell me about God, what is he like? God points to Israel and says, if you want to understand my character and how I interact with the people who are called by my name, look at Israel. Thus, Israel was called to be a holy people, a peculiar people, a separated people, a people kept separate by a God-centered way of life. The holidays were God's way that he designed that people would remember, always remember who he is and what he did for them. In other words, the very unique relationship that Israel had with their God. Well, the story of Hanukkah is a clash. God proved himself to be merciful and loving and gracious. And unlike all the other so-called gods of the people, he proved that he wanted everyone to know him. The gods of the world all were unique to that particular area, that particular people. They were very exclusive. No one could join themselves to that God unless it was that people, that tribe, that nation. But not so the God of Israel. The God of Israel says, all who will come to me. However, while he was tolerant of all people, he was and remains to this day intolerant of sin. Well, Hanukkah is the story of the clash between cultures. The culture of God and the culture without God. God's way versus man's way. A clash that began, it was a clash that began from the first day that Israel stepped onto the promised land, onto the land of Canaan. They were insistent on adopting, adapting, embracing the culture of the people who already lived here. The people that God said, get them out of the land. They have defiled my land with their pagan rites, their pagan philosophies. Get rid of them. Israel didn't. And to this day, they are a thorn in Israel's side. The clash of cultures continued when Israel was thrown out of the land and we went into Babylon. Oh, and there we found and embraced the ways of the Babylonians. We were separate from the temple. We were separate from the land. And there was this constant mixture of philosophies. So when Israel came back into the land, that mixture, that clash of cultures affected every way of life. It affected their religious life now that they were back in the land and back with the temple. It affected their politics. It affected their economics. It even affected the way they lived and did their sports and their leisure. The way they dressed, the way they ate, everything that God had given them specific instructions about, the new cultures clashed. Well, ultimately, there was a civil war. Now, the time frame that we're going to look at today to understand the setting of this holiday of Hanukkah is what we call the intertestamental times. From about the year 430 BC, or BCE, with the close of the prophet Malachi until about 165 BCE, which was the rise of Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes. In essence, Hanukkah, the holiday of Hanukkah, is the story of miracles. This is a miracle country. We have a miracle God, and therefore Hanukkah is the holiday of miracles. Not a miracle of a little jug of oil, but the miracle of a military victory that God gave to Israel, a small, ill-equipped army of farmers over the great and powerful Syrian or Greek army, or the powerful, very well-equipped Syrian army underneath Antiochus IV. Interestingly, the book of Daniel, chapters 10 through 12, explain and outline with such detail the military campaigns that many people believe that Daniel couldn't possibly have written it. I personally believe that Daniel did read it. But today we're going to set the historical stage of that cultural conflict which is the basis of the holiday. And by the way, as I'm describing society in the year about 165 BCE, remember, it's 2,500 years ago. I am not describing your world, my world today. Well, let's look at a timeline. Malachi's prophecy ended about the year 430. In 332, Alexander the Great, that young and brilliant military man, conquered Israel, Egypt, and the whole known world. 323, Alexander died, leaving no heir, and so he divided his empire into 4, giving each area to his very favorite generals. There are 2 generals that affect our story. There was a general Ptolemy who had charge of Egypt, and Seleucus who was over the Greeks. These 2 empires, if you will, smaller empires, were constantly battling over Israel. For the first couple of 100 years, Israel was under the rulership of Egypt, under Ptolemies. That was about 301 to 198. Then the Seleucids took over Israel. The 2 peoples were very, very different. The Egyptians under the Ptolemies were very favorable to Israel. Ptolemies were very, very interested in culture, and especially books and education. And the great library of Alexandria was developed. And they had an immense interest in the law of the Jewish people. And it was at that time, in fact, that Ptolemy called over 6 men from every tribe of Israel to interpret and to rewrite the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. Well, of course, that was the Septuagint. Well, Ptolemy was so impressed with the law of Moses, with the law of God, that he really let the Jewish people live. All he did was impose tremendous taxes on them, but he let them live and let live. He allowed them to live very autonomous lives and to continue in the way of life, their religious life. There was no royal governor that had to report back to Egypt, and so the high priest became both the political representative of Egypt as well as the religious representative of God. All that changed, however, in about 198 when the Seleucids took over the country. The Seleucids had a way of incorporating all those that they conquered by imposing upon them the Greek lifestyle. This is called Hellenization. Slowly and systematically, they began to impose the Greek way of life upon the Jewish people. The more Hellenistic they became, the more they proved their loyalty to the crown. Well, sadly, it wasn't very hard to impose the Greek way of life upon the Jews